Dear participants, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all who have joined from different parts of globe. I am Kunjan Bagadia, lead e-bus and public transportation at P Manifold. Hope you all are doing good and keeping safe in these testing times. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to fourth webinar in e-mobilogs series jointly organized by P Manifold and GIZ. Today's topic is very interesting, which is on e-bus adoption and integration, lessons from South Asia and Latin America, where we have onboarded two global prominent experts who will share their experience and insights of largest e-bus deployments across the globe. First, on case study from Shenzhen city in China, known for its successfully transition to 100% electric bus fleet with total fleet size of 16,000 plus buses between various operators and operating models. This will be briefly followed up by a pilot experience of supercapacitor buses being deployed in Hong Kong, which is a great technological solution for short distance last mile application. Second case study is from Santiago de Chile, which is home to world's largest electric bus fleet of approximately 500 buses outside China and in phase of transition towards 6,000 electric buses. In this case study, we will understand how private sector investment played a key role in pilot e-bus deployments, which then triggered for more tenders from the public tenders. Now, I request and invite my co-moderator, Amit Gopinath, technical expert at GIZ, to share brief about global e-bus outlook and forecast. Amit, please.
Thanks, Kunjan. Good evening, good morning to our participants. So as Kunjan said, our session is on e-bus adoption and integration lessons from South Asia and Latin America. So before we start, I'll just give a perspective, the global perspective of current e-bus. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so according to the latest figures, there are around 500,000 e-buses in operation globally, and the share of battery-operated vehicles is bound to cover sort of 67% by 2040. If we see the first chart, which shows the share of global bus sales, we can see how the graph has increased over the time till 2016, and gradually the sales have reduced. This majorly could be because of the constraints in terms of charging infrastructure and other factors like temperature and adoption rate. So gradually we have seen a dip. So this global outlook has been shared by the Bloomberg New Energy Finance. This is the latest figure which was launched early this year. And comparatively, if we see the e-bus share globally, China has almost 99% of the share of e-buses is with China, and rest of the world hardly has around 1%. So we know how extensively China has been adopting e-buses in their fleet. So what we have also got to understand is diesel and fuel cell buses are also going to be a part of the ecosystem. It's not going to be a fully electric bus fleet. So the transition is also going to be a mixed fleet of buses. Next slide, please. Yeah. So on this chart, on this graph, we can see how the global e-bus share has been shared amongst the different countries, and you can see how the growth has been forecasted from year 2018 to 25, and you can literally see how the graph of China has gone exponentially high. So China has been extensively pushing towards adoption of electric buses when compared to other cities and countries. And if you see India is quite slow when compared to the other countries. And on the other side, we have municipal e-bus sales. In this, we have excluded China because if we include China, the share cannot be represented on this graph. So here we can see rest of Europe and South Korea other global leaders apart from China in the e-bus sales. So this could be because like China has been aggressively prioritizing electric buses, and they have been electrifying its public transport with subsidies and national regulations. So we really need to, like, for rest of the world, it's a good opportunity to sort of push towards electrification to support their system, and also cut down on their GH emissions and other tailpipe pollutants. I would request Kunjan to sort of give an overview of the Indian bus transport system, where he would be sharing the growth and adoption rates in Indian cities.
Thanks, Amig, for sharing that global perspective. Very briefly, like India has around 650 plus e-buses deployed as of now. It can be seen on the left side chart. The market has grown at a CAGR of 265% in last 5 years, with last 2 years has seen major uptake of e-buses. These deployments are primarily the purchases made by state transport authorities in India, which are STUs, supported through combination of subsidies from central government under FAME 1 scheme, as well as their respective state governments. E-buses are further gaining momentum across various STUs in India due to a major policy push from Government of India under FAME 2 scheme. And there is already a sanction of 5,000 plus e-buses under operational model. The government has allocated a budget of nearly 41% share for e-bus deployments for these buses. It is clear that with focus on public transportation and need to increase its bus fleet size, India has opportunity to leapfrog and become one of the largest global player in e-buses. Some of the major cities in India with their respective e-buses are also indicated, just to give a sense to the audience. Today, we have two global speakers with us. First, Mr. Alok Jain. He is the Managing Director of Transconsult Asia, a boutique management consulting firm. He has over 25 years of experience and specializes in traffic and transport advisory services. Earlier, he was working as Deputy Operations Director at Kowloon Motor Bus Company and spearheaded the R&D work on the implementation of new technology and smart mobility, and led the strategy and planning to improve the overall efficiency. He is a regular speaker on multimodal integration, various public transport operations and management, clean vehicle technologies at various forums. He is also a member in Transport Policy Committee of Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport in Hong Kong. Today, Mr. Alok will share his experience of Shenzhen e-buses and how government supportive policies enabled this transition, and what business models and structuring resulted in better cooperation between all stakeholders in this transition. He will also briefly touch upon the applications of supercapacitor bus technology and its challenges and experience from Hong Kong. We welcome Mr. Alok Jain. Our second speaker is Mr. Manuel Oliveira. He is a regional director for Latin American cities at C40. Earlier, he has served for 6 years as the city director in Bogota and supported various projects on hybrid electric bus test program, reducing GHG emissions, and others. He has worked as a consultant for various multilateral banks like World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and UN organizations. Currently, he is supporting the 12 largest cities in Latin America that have committed carbon neutrality by 2050. Mr. Manuel, he is going to share his experience of Santiago de Chile, where private sector participation triggered some 500 electric buses being deployed with government support, and how this learnings resulted in bigger next planning and procurement of 2,000 plus buses at Chile and Bogota. We welcome Mr. Manuel Oliveira and Mr. Alok. I sincerely hope we will find great value in today's discussion through their insights and experience. We have a quick poll for the audience. Yeah, so the poll is displayed on the screen. Lot of stakeholders and experts have increasingly emphasized on the need for engaging all stakeholders. So how effectively cities engaging local electricity companies and city administration to reduce the descent for e-bus deployment. Please share your experience and response. You will have some 10-15 seconds. Okay, so we have an interesting result that cities probably are not very much effective. They are slightly or moderately taking steps to engage all stakeholders. We'll discuss and hear more about more from experts about their experience in their presentation. Now I request our first speaker, Mr. Alok Jain, to share his experience. Alok, over to you, please.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everybody. So this is, thank you for a great introduction, Kunjan, and this is Alok Jain from Hong Kong. I have been into public transport business for all my life, primarily in Hong Kong. I am currently doing a lot of consulting work, even outside Hong Kong, all over the world. We are in field of electric buses. I was involved with a lot of initial testing, the generation 1, generation 2, and generation 3, and now what we call is a generation 4 bus. And we have been involved in testing with various Chinese suppliers in Hong Kong and in China. During that process, I'm currently also working with EBRD, European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, to develop their electric bus policy. I do some work with UITP, International Association of Public Transport, in the areas of electrical mobility. For last few years, I have also been conducting training and tour for international audience to take them to various Chinese cities to show how electric buses are deployed and various type of electric bus operation models. So yeah, if you are, anybody of you are interested in doing more of these on the ground activities, feel free to get in touch with me. Okay, there's always this question that people ask, what did China do? It's like a fairy tale. So until 2015, Shenzhen hardly had any buses in the city. And suddenly within 2 years, by 2017 June, entire fleet of the city was converted into electric. In less than 2 years, 16,500 diesel buses changed into electric. It was, if it did not already happen, I would have thought that this was unbelievable. This was not true, but it has been done. So it's a fantastic case study to learn from and to see what were the impetus to make this change in the city, because I think every city today would like to go towards that similar kind of transformation, and finding it very challenging for one way or the other. Somehow things came together in Shenzhen, and that's the story I'm going to tell. And just next to Shenzhen, this is like a Delhi, Noida, Delhi, Gurgaon kind of situation. So next to Hong Kong, we have next to Shenzhen, we have Hong Kong, literally border to border, adjacent city. And Hong Kong, we have found introduction of electric buses extremely challenging. We are doing a lot of trials here, but wide scale introduction of electric buses have been extremely challenging. And primarily, this is a classic case study where two cities next to each other, one city makes it work, another city is unable to make it work. Okay, so we'll quickly talk about that too. But some of the trials are very nice, and I'll talk about one technology, which is supercapacitor, which not many people talk about when it comes to a clean vehicle or electric bus deployment. So Chinese story, Ameg already talked about this. And I think the scale of operation, if you see in China, is basically every 5 weeks in China, they are adding a London worth of buses. So this is the scale. So it's a huge amount of production and huge amount of consumption. I often take people to bus manufacturers in China, and the scale that you see there is just amazing. If you, I mean, if you, any of you, if you have visited a factory from Yutong, which is the world's largest bus manufacturer, they do roughly 70,000 buses per year from a single factory in Zhengzhou. So it's just the scale in China for these things is just supersized. So how it started was in 2008, basically. I write 2009, but 2008 during Beijing Olympics, uh, Beijing administration, they deployed a fleet of electric buses to carry the sportsmen around from one stadium to another, from their residential area to stadiums, so on and so forth. And they were using a swapping technology at that time. And buses had a range of just 80 kilometers per day. And there was a very high breakdown rate and all kind of problems that you can imagine. And these were first generation electric buses. They were not really anywhere close to what you can deploy in a regular routine city operation. But this operation during the Olympics kind of gave government a bit of confidence that they decided in 2009 to launch this 10 cities, 1,000 vehicles program. And they wanted to have some cities take this up and build an electric infrastructure, because China put a big bet on the future. And I'll talk about the whole business model around it and how strategically they thought about this entire thing and implemented as a countrywide transformation, and where they could actually even achieve global dominance. So they started with this 10 cities, 1,000 vehicle program. Unfortunately, this was not very successful. So 2009 to 13, they had some wins, but it didn't really work out. They had some subsidies, but only 7 out of 25 cities actually met the target. So they changed. They started with 10 cities, then they increased to 25 cities, but not many could meet that. It was only in 2014 when a lot of data why this was not successful came back to the government, and government relaunched this whole push towards new energy vehicles in China. That's when things started to pick up. Okay, so it is a completely policy driven market. So this is, you can see the energy EV sales in China, how this has changed over a period of time. And Amit was just talking about why sales have dropped after 2015, electric bus sales, global sales. But if you connect that to 98% of the global electric bus fleet being in China, you have the answer. The only one country that can really affect the global market is China. And that number is right here. So what happened was they actually reduced the subsidy substantially. So 2014, government launched a new subsidy scheme, which was really popular, but it had number of loopholes, and a lot of people started making advantage of that loophole. And then the government came down heavily on them, and they started putting a very strict regulation. So you can see here in 2016, this strict regulation on subsidy fraud. And when that happened, the sales of vehicles went down substantially. Of course, after that, it has started to come back again. But that was a point where sales literally plummeted. So this is, in a way, in a quick sense, there is a lot of Chinese words here which talk about different policy measures that the government introduced. Some of the key points I have translated in English, and this is, as so it's a electric bus in any country is, in the past, has been a very policy driven market. It required subsidy because unlike diesel buses, the whole operating model is completely different. Diesel buses is compared to electric, less capital heavy, but more operation heavy. So that's a higher recurrent cost and less capital cost. Electric buses is completely opposite, very high capital cost and less recurrent cost. So you need to create a completely new type of financing models to make it work. These were different subsidy models that the government introduced and the policy measures behind it. Chinese are great in giving names to different policies, and these are again straight translation of Chinese words. So they basically, the first stage was 2010 to 15, where they wanted to have a demonstration assessment in public for government first push, and then it went through this. I won't go through detail in this one, we have limited time on this, but obviously if anybody of you want to know more about this, I'll be happy to discuss separately. This is actually an interesting one where you can see how China is trying to develop this whole electric market. So obviously, like India, China is a net importer of fossil fuel. The cost of fossil fuel was a big concern, and obviously import bills and dependency on other countries is very high. Climate change, as you know, there was a point in 2013 when world's in the top 10 polluted cities, there were 5 cities from China. So obviously that was a big cause of concern for any policymaker, for a country that was urbanizing very fast and that was growing very fast, to improve the urban air quality. And obviously the global climate change was also started to become a conversation topic around that time. There was also this huge demand for renewables, and China wanted to take a lead on the renewable technology, and they were developing a lot. So they invested heavily into wind power and solar power during that era. And obviously, when you link wind power and solar power, the biggest problem is that it is only available for part of the day. So you have to store it somewhere. And that storage required a battery development. And that battery, once you had, then of course there was a push that what can we do with this battery? And obvious answer was to do an electric vehicle. Now, electric vehicle has been around since 19th century. In fact, the electric vehicles were made even before diesel vehicles were done. So it is nothing new in that sense, and everybody knows electric is cleaner. But of course, electric has its own issues in terms of operation and maintenance, and which I see that the internal combustion engine kind of overcame. So when they came to EV, then they built the entire business around EV because there was nobody else in the world who was actually doing this. So they developed the whole chain of supply chain of OEMs around that, and the components, the charging infrastructure, and the whole new business line kind of grew around it. And of course, now they are moving towards fuel cells, and fuel cells and the same push that they did with electric vehicles. You can see the same thing happening with fuels at the moment. They're going through number of trials in various cities and various type of technologies and various type of charging infrastructure. And there's a lot of trial and error that's happening. And again, if you look at Chinese history, they didn't go for single technology when it came to EV. They tried literally everything: top charging, bottom charging, side charging, and swapping, battery swapping, charging in motion. You name any single way of charging that is available in China, and they are actually running those services. So they are still collecting data, and they have not closed the door on this development of electric vehicles. Obviously, we always talk about electric vehicle being clean, but people say that, hey, the power source is not clean. So why are we talking about just the buses? Of course, at the point of emission, clean buses make a huge impact. I can tell you, Shenzhen, just 5-7 years ago, you could not walk on the street. It was like Delhi, like Mumbai. It's just you would had a grime on your face in 15 minutes. Today, you go to the city, Shenzhen city, and you can walk around anywhere, and it's absolutely air is clean, and it's primarily because of these electric vehicles. So at the point of emission on the roadside, where what you breathe, certainly electric vehicles make an impact. But having said that, China has also done a huge amount of work at the renewable energy generation. So as you can see from this chart, China is putting a lot of investment in renewable energy. Currently, they have actually, the investment on renewables in China is highest in the world. They have surpassed everybody, Europe, US, everybody, and they are just putting wind farms and solar farms and all kind of renewables actually all over the place. So battery production, again, as you can see, the battery production has kept increasing worldwide. China has taken the lead. One is the ready availability of lithium. Second is, if you link it to China's Africa strategy, they have actually gone in cities or countries where lithium is in ample supply, and they have tried to be a very active part of that lithium supply chain, whether it's Africa, South America, in Argentina, or anywhere. Chinese have actually taken control of that lithium supply chain, and they have gone very big into battery production. Charging infrastructure. So China has also developed this whole layer of new businesses, which is charging infrastructure. They're all over the country. In every city, they are developing these businesses. So if you look at example of Shanghai, there are 200,000 charging stations charging points in Shanghai, of which you can see roughly 36,000 are public, 32,000 are bus companies, and remaining 130,000 are actually privately operated charging points. So these can not just do buses, they do also taxis, they do cars, they do all kind of charging in every place. They are also putting very active restriction on fossil fuel car production side. So every automaker in China, they only get a sales license when they have at least 10% of their sales, that was in 2019, is new energy vehicles. So every company in China has to produce electric vehicles. By 2020, this percentage will increase to 12%, and the target is that it will go up to 20% of the production. So every car maker in China, 20% of their production has to be electric cars. So that actually goes a long way in promoting electric infrastructure also. In many cities in China, such as Shenzhen, Beijing, Shanghai, all the major cities, you also cannot buy a diesel car if you don't have a quota. But electric cars are quota free. So they are promoting that on the consumer side too. So there's a huge amount of push towards owning electric vehicles. And the reason I'm mentioning cars here is because they are trying to amortize this charging infrastructure, because the principle here is that a country like China, people would buy cars, and if you make them buy electric cars, that would increase the usage of charging infrastructure. That would also increase the number of chargers in the city, which will then make the whole electric vehicle infrastructure viable. So a lot of subsidies and support. I won't go into the details of this table, but in general, roughly a large to medium-sized bus in 2015 was in Shenzhen was eligible for about 500,000 renminbi, which is about 150,000 US subsidy from the local government, and 150,000 US dollar subsidy from the central government. And you put that in the pot, then actually the electric bus was at par or even cheaper than a comparable diesel bus. So obviously the whole fear about capital load at the front end was addressed by the subsidy that China was offering. So Shenzhen, how did they do it? They obviously put all the right things together. I'll talk about some of the key steps that they took. So Shenzhen today has more electric buses than rest of the world outside China combined. So it's a huge amount of fleet, 16,500 buses. Some of you who might be interested in seeing some trivia, I highly recommend to visit this YouTube link when BYD delivered the electric buses. So it was a delivery of 3,000 electric buses in a single batch to Shenzhen bus, and you would see kilometers and kilometers of new buses just parked in the street in Shenzhen, and they were then driven to Shenzhen bus depots. So I mean, interesting video to watch. So subsidies we talked about. So in Shenzhen, a 12-meter bus, they got 150,000 subsidy from government and 150,000 from the state government. Okay? So this allowed them to cover the cost gap. Okay, but obviously later studies after launch of these services, some of these studies done by WRI in China, they have actually done the calculation based on the real operating statistics, and they find that actually subsidies may not be necessary. The total operating cost of an electric bus is comparable, and to some extent it is cheaper than a normal diesel bus. Okay, so e-bus as a life cycle cost comes out to be about 375,000. Diesel bus is 340,000 at the moment. And if you again, now this was in 2017, but some of the figures that I see now in 2020, the numbers are hugely in favor of electric buses, and that is primarily to do with the higher availability of the bus, more reliability of the bus. So back in 2017 in China, they were achieving around 70 to 75% of fleet availability, and today it is more than 90%. So, and that makes a huge difference in total operating cost for electric buses. Okay, so as a rule of thumb, I always use these numbers that in terms of fuel consumption, an electric bus is about 40% cheaper, or sorry, 60% cheaper. So 40% is the cost of energy for an electric bus, and maintenance wise, it's about half of a diesel bus. Manpower cost is more or less the same between diesel and electric. So once you put this rule of thumb, you can actually work out these calculations in any city in the world, and that gives you kind of a guidance on those. Of course, electric buses also required a lot more land in the city, and especially because of the charging infrastructure, which takes some space. And they had to lease a lot of private land. Shenzhen bus, for example, they have 180 depots around the city. Out of 180 depots, they converted almost 150 depots into charging points and charging stations for buses and other vehicles and taxis and whatnot. So, and also there was a lot of private buildings. So I'll show you a picture I think I have of one of the big charging stations in Shenzhen. And these are multi-story buildings with 600, 700 bus charging capacity at one go. Okay. So this also reduced the cost of operation for the bus operator because it covered the upfront cost. Optimized charging and operation. As I said, there is a lot of chargers in the city, which was done by a completely separate business, where the buses would go, or cars would go, or taxis would go and buy the power from these charging stations. So in most of the Chinese cities, or in Shenzhen specifically, roughly the ratio of one bus per bus to a charging point is about 1:3. So one charging point for 3 buses. Okay. So which is very good penetration of charging points in the city if you want to run an electric bus infrastructure. So you don't have to so it addresses a lot of range anxiety issues, dead mileage issues if you have so many charging points. Another issue which worries everybody is batteries. And again, Shenzhen Bus here worked very closely with BYD, which was the primary supplier of their fleet. They tried to get a lifetime warranty, which was 8-year warranty for the batteries. And having said that, they did have a lot of problems with batteries in the early stages of procurement. But because they were into this warranty arrangement with BYD, BYD gave them very high quality support. And today, the batteries are very stable, and they are operating and achieving similar efficiencies. Then, as I said, the availability has gone up significantly and achieving similar numbers as diesel buses. So life cycle cost. So a lot of numbers now kind of go around and being worked at. So as the data keeps coming and we gather more and more information. So average electric bus costs about 2 million yuan. That's the capital cost. With the local subsidies and national subsidies, which is now changed. And of course, the subsidies have been decreased substantially. So China gave a subsidy. A lot of people bought electric buses, and then they are slowly withdrawing the subsidy because they realize that even on an economic value model, the buses are viable. So people are going to buy it nevertheless. So subsidies are being reduced slowly. Okay. So for 50,000 km, a diesel bus requires 20,000 liters of fuel, which is roughly 130,000 RMB yuan. Electric bus is only 35,000 yuan. So this is Chinese figures at the moment. Okay. And cost of a charging pole in China today is about 100,000 RMB. And life cycle in there, what they use is about 8 years. Space requirement is always a challenge, and Shenzhen is now becoming one of the most expensive places to land, and they are afraid that most of these private leases, they're becoming so valuable now that they would not be able to extend the lease on these, and they are worried that that will impact the charging infrastructure significantly. But anyway, so this is one of the buildings, which is a charging station in Shenzhen, which can charge in close to over 500 buses at any given point of time. So the billion people market. Now, why? Obviously, this success story in China, or how can it be translated to India? These are both billion people markets. China has close to about 300,000 buses. I saw the figure just now that India has about 150,000 buses, which is half of what China has. So one, I think India has very small number of buses, and which should be, in my opinion, the number of buses need to go up. That's one. And two, and once you have the number of buses going up, then you have all these replacement cycles and production cycles and whatnot, which is a completely new economy that can be built around it. So this billion people market will actually drive the technology in the world. Smaller countries, because the investment in technology is so heavy, will probably will be left far behind, and bigger markets like India and China would control in future. And if you see the penetration, the way India is growing, actually it's a very good signal at the moment. The growth trajectory is very, very encouraging there. So that's on China. I'll quickly move to supercapacitor trial in Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong is 90% of the daily travel in Hong Kong is actually made on public transport, and out of which about 30%, 35% is on buses. So in city, there's a fleet of about 6,500 buses, which carry approximately 4.5 million passenger journeys per day. Now, out of this, and most of these journeys are carried on a double-decker bus. So Hong Kong has more than 90% of the local fleet is actually 3XL double-deck bus. At the moment, and Hong Kong, I mean, anybody who is familiar with Hong Kong, we have very little space in Hong Kong. Only 13% of the urban land area is given to roads, which is among the lowest in the world. Most of the countries average around 20, 25, and US cities are of course 30 plus, but Hong Kong has very little land given to the roads, so it's very congested. Road space is at a premium. So we are looking for minimum footprint. Manpower cost is very high. So when you combine these two, higher the capacity of the bus, better it is, for operators. There is a zero subsidy from government in Hong Kong. Everything, all the bus operation in Hong Kong is commercial and has to survive on their own. So we have this whole drive towards efficiency where every last drop of blood matters to us. So under those circumstances, introducing electric buses where the capital cost is too high, where the capacity is too low because it was only available on single deck until recently. How do you put that in cities like Hong Kong? So obviously no operator wants to do it because they'd have parking issues, they have staff issues because suddenly you need two drivers for the same capacity, and economics just doesn't work. So what government did, they launched this pilot green transport fund a few years ago. 2013, and they gave 180 million Hong Kong dollar as a subsidy to various public transport operators in Hong Kong to buy a total of 36 electric buses, and this was on trial for 2 years. So these buses were given to the companies and they would run it for 2 years, and then government will decide whether bus companies can keep the buses or not. But all the data during this trial period has to be shared in public domain, and so that they can develop the whole R&D around it and develop it in the city. So 28 electric buses and 8 supercapacitor buses. So I'm not going to talk about electric buses. I think you all know enough about electric buses, and there have been other seminars on electric buses, and the story of Hong Kong is nothing unique in that respect. But supercap buses, I hear very little about it. So 8 supercap buses, I was directly involved in the procurement and the testing and commissioning of these electric bus in supercapacitor buses. This was a very new technology for all of us. It's a single deck buses. Passenger capacity of a 12-meter bus was approximately 72 seats, 72 capacity with 35 seating, roughly 50% seats. Produced by China Youngman. Battery, very little, as you can see, 53 kilowatt hour. It was basically cylinders, the supercapacitors, and power requirement was very similar to any other, overhead charging facilities. The trial actually started in March 2017. One big story around it is that when I was putting this infrastructure, the buses actually arrived. The first 2 buses arrived with us in the depot in October 2015, and this trial started in March 2017. So you can imagine, almost 1.5 years we had buses just standing there in the depot, and the reason for that was charging infrastructure. Putting a charger in public area in Hong Kong was such a challenge for us in those days, and in fact the charging infrastructure was not a challenge. My last 50 meter was the challenge, where I had to bring an electric cable from a transformer to my charging point, and that took me over a year running around various government departments and all the stakeholders for approvals to install that one night of excavation and put in the cable. So yeah, it is if you ask me, charging infrastructure is certainly much more challenging than just buying the buses. So initially, when we launched the services, we found that there was some unstable operation due in high temperatures in summer in supercapacitor. So we went to bus supplier, and we actually worked very closely with the bus supplier to adjust that. Now the operation is quite satisfactory. Actually, it's working absolutely fine. It's running on one of the routes, which is not very long. It's only about 5.7 kilometer route, okay, which is very frequent, very high load factors. Okay, and it's like a feeder route to a railway station. Okay? So this is how the charging point looks like in a bus, in a public transport interchange at the moment. This is how the route looks, which is runs every 12 to 15 minutes from railway station, which is, as you can see, it's a Newtown Plaza is the railway station, to a dense population in Ravana Garden. So and it takes about 20 minutes to full charge. So buses actually charge overnight at the depot, and then in the morning when they are deployed, they are charged every time they stop at the terminus, and a charging time is combined with the layover time of the bus as well as the boarding time of the bus. So boarding time plus layover time gives you about 15-20 minutes, and that is where you do the top-up charging. Okay. So obviously, so this SuperCap has performed very well. The operation cost is very good, and I actually should have a slide for the performance. So it looks like I got deleted. Anyway, so the performance has been satisfactory. The breakdowns are not as much. I mean, initially we had a lot of issues. So 4 buses have been deployed. There are 4 more coming, SuperCap, which will be deployed in another route in Hong Kong, in an area called Kai Tak. And in my personal opinion, SuperCap appears to be much better than battery buses for short haul feeder services, because they charge very fast, they are very quick, and with a single charge they can easily do 12 to 16 kilometers in a single charge. And obviously they don't have the same issues as battery, where the quality of life of battery goes down with every charge, and every 4 or 5 years you have issues with battery you need to replace. SuperCap is much simpler electrical storage technology. The only problem with SuperCap is it's not as stable as battery. So it doesn't give you a lot of range, and it doesn't give you a lot of life. No, life as in gives you the life for the bus, but in terms of the charge life. So you have to use it immediately, literally, otherwise it dissipates. So for short haul services, SuperCap is actually a fantastic technology, and one must look at them for feeder route network. So Hong Kong, as I said, we don't have many electric buses. What are we waiting for? We are, of course, waiting for double-deck electric buses. There are some coming. London is doing a trial, and we are also working very closely in the city with various suppliers in the world internationally to get a 3XL double-deck electric bus, and hopefully we'll be seeing them soon on the roads here. There are some running in London, but the key difference between London and Hong Kong is London doesn't require air conditioning, and in Hong Kong 40% of my energy bill is actually air conditioning. Summers are very hot, and air conditioning is literally a must. High humidity, high heat, and without air conditioning we can't run the bus operation here. So that's the key difference, why it works in London, why it works in many other places, but or European countries, but it doesn't work in Hong Kong. Singapore is also trying to do a number of electric bus trials at the moment, and everybody is waiting. Dubai is trying to go down the same path, and they hopefully they will also do some electric bus trial very soon. Of course, the holy grail of zero emission technology is hydrogen buses. And the good news, I was just reading a few weeks ago, Brightbus in UK, they have actually they're coming up with the plan to introduce 3,000 hydrogen buses in by 2024. So almost 10% of the UK's fleet, they are saying, will be hydrogen buses, and they will only release water vapor. So, and obviously China is doing a lot of hydrogen related work, and we are watching that if hydrogen comes, because hydrogen is actually very good for double deck and long haul commercial buses, because it's a much more stable. The problem with hydrogen is that you don't have the charging, again, refueling infrastructure. And once you have, if you can develop that, then this is really the technology of the future. So obviously this is something to watch out for. So that brings me to the end. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alok. That was a very interesting presentation. Hello. Thanks, Alok. Yeah, so basically your presentation essentially helps us visualize how big the scale of e-bus operation is actually in China, and clearly says how it can easily create a global disruption. Going ahead, we have a poll for the audience. We would request you to answer the question. How engaged and enthusiastic private sector is for investing in pilot scale-up in e-buses, and with what return? So you have 4 options for it. First is high risk, high return, high risk, low return, low risk, high return, and low risk, low return. We'll give you 5 to 10 seconds to respond to that question. Okay, so the results are and clearly says it's high risk and low return. Interesting to know, and followed up by low risk, high return, and high risk, high return. Okay, so we'll share this poll results with the audience post the webinar session. Going ahead, now we have Mr. Manuel, who will be sharing his perspective and his experience from Latin America. Over to you, Mr. Manuel.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for the invitation. Good evening and afternoon and morning for anyone joining this call. So I want to say that even though I used to be a biologist, I began my professional life doing a lot of experiments in terms of how cities can evolve in environmental terms properly. So that was my main subject of work for many years, environmental evaluation, and I began to see transport as the main driver in terms of development of cities. So I began to test buses and be involved in testing buses and learning a lot about testing buses in CNG, using hybrid buses and the like, 20 years ago or something like that. So I began to see transport as the main way to improve life quality of people in cities, especially because of the pollution problems that were around not only in the Colombian cities, but also in Latin American cities. So I began to work a lot in buses, and as you can see, I've been involved in this process of transformation of the fleets in Latin America for many years already. So let me take you to a couple of examples. We're going to see how C40 works, where is it coming from, how Santiago de Chile became an example to follow in Latin America, how Bogota was in competition with Santiago and became also an example, different example actually, in the same line, but different, and what is coming in Latin America. So this organization is an NGO, an international NGO, which is formed with 96 large cities, mega cities, most of them, spread through the whole world. It began to exist around 60 years ago and was in place thanks to the mayor of London during those days, Mayor Ken Livingstone. And then it got the support of many people, mayors, and it was organized as a formal institution with the president of the board and so on. And the former president was the mayor of Paris, who is still the mayor, now Mayor Hidalgo, and now the chair of C40 is the mayor Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles. So we have these 96 cities working with us, and we help in the cities around the world, and 12 of those 96 cities are in Latin America. Actually, cities that my colleague was talking about, like Shenzhen and Hong Kong, are C40 cities. So they are examples for other cities. And this is what we do actually, sharing examples among different cities that are part of our organization. We have core funders and programmatic funders. So the most of the funds that we work with are coming from these three especially generous organizations, and then we have some programmatic funding for programs like, for instance, CFF, the C40 Cities Finance Facility, that is helping cities to structure projects and to make them bankable. Climate action plans, and we expect that most of the cities, at least 70 cities around the world, are going to have their climate action plans by the end of the year or early next year, in order to help accomplishing the goals of the Paris Agreement. And we have with ICCT, an international organization, a partnership that is called Zebra, and Zebra is there to help cities to deploy electric buses in their cities. Now, why we are working with cities? This is a climate change organization and is there to help cities to work against the problem that we have inherited. And as you can see in this graph, we have been growing in terms of human caused emissions since 1990, because that is the largest amount of emissions that we have gathered, we have produced since the last several decades, and we need to do something about that. And if the cities work together, actually, if the cities larger than 100,000 people work together with towards the compliance of the Paris Agreement, we are going to be able to comply with 40% of the target of the Paris Agreement. And this is what we are working on. Now, let's have a look on Latin America and why and how we reached this point. So you may know that Latin America is a little bit behind everything, and we are, looking at some other experiences around the world and see what works, what doesn't work. But still, it's an evolving market, not as big as other markets. However, several years ago, actually in 2011, we got some funds from the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, that help us to structure a hybrid and electric bus test program in 4 cities in Latin America. One of the things that we did, besides testing buses, that we took from city to city to analyze how this worked, how those buses worked. One important thing that we did was to take around 20 operators and transport authorities around the world. So we stopped in many cities to see the experience that the cities had with hybrid buses and where was the case with 100% electric buses. So actually, we stopped in Mexico City, where we had some hybrid buses, in London, and in a couple of cities in Sweden, in Moscow, and then in China. We visited several places, and Shenzhen was an extraordinary example on how the city had decided to move to transform the fleet. And during those days, 2011 perhaps, they had around 800 buses running, and we visited the premises where the buses were. We learned a lot how the buses were having issues, not issues, how the batteries were lasting, how it was, the operation of those buses. And we were building confidence among the operators, among the authorities that were with us. We also visited several examples in Shanghai, and the photograph you see to the right hand is a photograph in a place where they used to shift batteries. That was another example of buses and how it worked with the machine, doing the homework, taking a lot of time, for the shifting, but very little time actually compared to the time that the buses used to spend when they needed charge. We also learned a lot on how was opportunity charging, the use of pantographs, and the use of supercapacitors or ultracapacitors. We checked all those experiences during those days, and this was the seed that at the end of the day helped several cities in Latin America to begin to work towards what we have today. Actually, by the end of the research, we made probably the first real comprehensive analysis of the total ownership cost of electric buses compared to diesel buses, hybrid buses, and any other kind of bus that was there. So the result for several cities was that the TCO was positive between 14 and 34% for electric buses analyzed in 10 years. So that was the first TCO that was prepared around the world. And of course, very few people thought that it was reality. So it took a lot of time, and a lot of analysis. And we explained WRI how this focus was key, and they did the same exercise, more comprehensive, more in-depth, and so on. And the World Bank did it, and ICCT, and everybody began to do that, and everybody arrived almost to the same kind of results. So it was very interesting because at the beginning we were quite alone, and then what you can see in Latin America is that many institutions are doing something similar, and then sometimes they think that they are the first, doing the homework. However, this is what we did, and we kept, building confidence. It took a lot of time, of course, and however, we saw that there were very few interested suppliers in the Latin American market, especially the European suppliers, which are the main suppliers of diesel buses, because they have factories in Brazil, and they were not that interested in getting involved in electric buses. So we began to discuss with the suppliers in other parts, especially in Asia, and finally we brought some companies to test buses in Latin America. So we created this proof of concept, and this proof of concept was used for several cities to begin to open the door for electric buses in several cities. And we did a lot of work on knowledge sharing with a workshop and technical assistance to some cities. And here we are. Then we found out that Santiago brought a couple of buses for testing purposes. One company only from those 10 companies that we approached to invite them to get involved in the Latin American market. They decided to get involved in only one company decided to get fully involved in this process. So they began to put buses in different places, in different cities, and Santiago was one of those cities. And they brought a couple of buses, they worked with an operator, and the operator built his own case. He decided, or the operator decided, to test in real condition these two e-buses in commercial operation, and then this operator found out that it was so interesting, the kind of results that he was getting, that he decided to go around the world and see how the market was offering different kind of electric buses, how the batteries were produced, where they were produced. And he finally found out that the Chinese suppliers were the more developed companies around the world. So this operator decided to go for the first 100 buses. But in order to do that, he got in connection with this electric utility company, Enel. It's Italian company, large, very large, and made an agreement that had the operator to structure a business case. Enel had already seen the experiment that we had carried out in Bogota, because we had a couple of buses in Bogota, and they were not that involved at the beginning, but then they saw that this was the line of the market in the future regarding mobility. Now, how the private sector finally got involved. First, Metbus decided to go for the first 100. And now made an agreement with Metbus. Then they went to the government and told the government, we need your support. And the government said, well, okay, I'm fine, but I'm not going to pay you any additional penny beyond what we are paying for diesel buses. if you can make your case under that ceiling, fair enough. We can guarantee that we are going to pay you during the 10 years time that the contract is going to last or whatever, maximum that amount of money. So they also tell the Enel that since Enel was going to be the owner of the buses, they told Enel, okay, if this supplier goes away and is replaced by, excuse me, I repeat myself. If this operator is not part of the next concession of buses, say in 1, 2, 3 years, we are going to pass your buses and the obligations to the next operator. So they found that the buses had 10 years of lifespan, but the contract of the Enel between Enel and Netbus was only 10 years for some financial reasons. Then in 2018, the first 100 buses were launched, but it wasn't enough. So this created a nice competence and concurrence, and Engie, another large company that you may know quite well in Asia, it's a French company, they decided to go for 100 more. So they bought 100 more and leased to another 2 operators. And at the same time, Medbus decided to buy 100 more. Then we were talking about 300, and then 250 more. And then this is growing. And Medbus at the beginning said, we will never buy again a diesel bus. They were so convinced about how the performance of the electric buses were that they decided to never buy again one of those buses. And this is a large operator in Santiago. Now, so I was saying that the retribution, that means the payment back to the operator and to Enel or to Engie, is going to be the same, maximum the same of diesel. But it turns out that all the operators are earning a lot of money because of the saving. So in Santiago, there are actually, because it's a large laboratory, we have actually very good data. And it's a large laboratory outside China, of course, and other countries in Asia. So the facts are, at the beginning, no bank wanted to loan any money for investors to go for buses. So the decision was from Enel and Engie, well, we're going to buy the buses with our cash. They decided to buy BYD and Yutong buses because those buses were under test. Actually, Yutong brought, when Yutong saw that BYD had some buses there, Yutong came, finally accepted our invitation to test buses in Latin America, and they brought one bus and put it in the hands of operators. So each operator decided what kind of bus we're going to use to buy, hand in hand with Enel and Engie. So the 2 utility companies leased those buses between 10 and 12 years in a lease of 10 to 12 years to operators. And they were expecting a range between 300 and 320 K of cost. Actually, that was the cost. Between $300,000 and $320,000 cost was the cost of the buses. No single penny from the country, from the city. There was no subsidy for the purchase of the buses, and there is no subsidies besides the tariff in Chile. Now, there's some more information here, but I want to move on to another set of figures here. Now, since the banks didn't want to loan, some of the agreements, inside agreements, private agreements, was that the electric infrastructure was going to be built by the electric utilities. So they put the cost in the invoice of electricity. But 100% of the electricity that they need to offer needs to be 100% renewable. So they need to guarantee that. In the negotiation, they offered 40% below the cost of the kilowatts to the operator, and of course that cost is going to be covered by the city. And then different buses have different kind of batteries in terms of brand. And what is important is that they reach a guarantee that offers both kind of batteries. And actually bus suppliers, they offer 8 years for 8% of SOC and 10 years for the 70% of SOC. That becomes the threshold for any other negotiation in Latin America. Some additional figures here. So the buses are running now are more than 452, and there are 150 and on a boat already arriving to Santiago. The brands that you have in Santiago are these 4 brands, and these 2 never test anything, but they want to get into the business, and they have already sold some buses in town. The autonomy proof is between 200 and 250. Despite the fact that the suppliers are saying that the autonomy is 270 kilometers or 320 kilometers, turns out that when you use air conditioning, of course, 30% of the consumption of the battery goes to the air conditioning, so the autonomy is reduced. It's obvious, but it's measured. Now, what is important to note is that the cost of maintenance, the maintenance cost is 30% of the diesel bus compared to the diesel bus. This is what makes happy those operators. This is for them absolutely fantastic. And the comparison between diesel cost, the energy between diesel and electricity is 29% below in electricity compared to diesel. Those are facts, and that makes everybody happy. And the availability, which is a key indicator in the operator's life, is 99.6%. This is amazing. Nobody was expecting this kind of availability of those buses. And the energy efficiency, if we can call that, the performance of the buses, at least for one of the operators, is 1 kilowatt per kilometer. Let's finish with Santiago de Chile, the public view. The public view is we need to become a zero emission country, a zero emission with zero emission cities near 2030. So they decided to split the tender. Now it's a public tender, not just the private decision in the current operation, but the public tender for the next 10 to 15 years. So they decided to split the tender in 1 for suppliers, 1 for operators, 1 for infrastructure, 1 for depots, and 1 for fare collection. So for now, everything is delayed because of different reasons, but coronavirus is helping badly, the process of tendering buses. But the total is going to be around 2,030 buses. And at least 75 buses is the minimum amount, needs to be electric, but you can offer the 2,030 buses electric. They expect this possible mix, the electric, CNG, and diesel, although Chile doesn't have too much CNG. So another difference that is going to take place is that the lifespan that is accepted for diesel buses is 10 years, and for electric buses is going to be 15 years, and that's going to change the rule for the contracts. So the contracts for 15 years are going to be more profitable for the operators, and the operators can, compete for those buses as well. Let's take a look at Bogota, because many things also started here. Bogota was part of the test as well. So there were a couple of hybrid and 1 electric bus that were tested around 2011. The results were rather good, but we needed to tell the bus suppliers, you need to adapt the characteristics of the buses to the regulations of the countries, of the cities, because all the buses were heavier than the regulations allowed. And they said, no, change the regulations. And we told them, no, you change the bus and you adapt to the customer, not the country. This is changing. This is the market that is demanding. The market is defining the rules, not you defining the rules for the market. So this became a very interesting paradigm for the bus suppliers. So they began to adapt their production to the needs of the cities, and now everything is in compliance. They adapt to heavy slopes. They adapt to more or less passengers inside the buses and so on. So Bogota was a little bit reluctant to go for tender, and it took some time. And when a mayor was going to go for 100% buses tender, his term was over, and the next mayor decided to not go for that. But at the end of the day, he got convinced because Santiago de Chile was doing the homework. So they opened a tender in 2018, but no electric bus was awarded, although there was an offer of 200 articulated buses for this tender. But in 2019, the city also opened a tender, and it was for 570 buses, and they awarded only 483 e-buses, which is good. And they are going to be running they are beginning to arrive in 2 months' time into Bogota. Now, interesting here is that different from Chile, here we have a capital fund, which is called Ashmore, and an electric facility in Colombia that is called Celsia, and they decided to put the money, not the banks. Now, since we have a lot of information regarding how CNG buses are performing, diesel buses are performing, and electric buses are performing, this is the difference. So if you compare the energy cost between CNG, diesel, and electricity, you have that electric cost of energy is far below any other option here. So this is something of very high interest for the bus operators and for the cities, of course, because this is money that is coming from the fares, or from subsidies, or from the pocket, of course, the pocket of the user, so the bus user. Some other figures here, quickly. A new tender is ready. It is going to go in a couple of days out, and it's going to require 1,945 buses. Euro 6 minimum, and minimum 631 buses out of these 1,900. But you can offer the 1,900 as electric buses. And if you go for electric buses, you're going to have a contract for 15 years instead of 10 years for the diesel buses. And the autonomy that is going to be required is this one. So Enel here in Colombia is part of it's an interested party, but they are only interested in putting the infrastructure. They are not interested for now in putting the money. And who grants the payback? A trust fund that is already set and is receiving money. Let's finish with a look around the future of electromobility in Latin America. We have been breaking a lot of myths. It's very complicated. It has been really hard to break these myths. So everybody was saying, no, I mean, buses are just prototypes. This is too risky. Well, turns out that the buses are there, are reliable, are efficient, are viable, and yes, they go up, because some people think that electric buses never go up the hills, and we are plenty of hills. Turns out that not only they go up, but they also go downhill. So downhills. So it's really interesting to see how these myths are break down. In Latin America, despite these myths, we started testing 8 buses by 2016. They were in different cities. Today we have more than 1,200 running. We thought 3,000, 1,300. But 4,000 are coming soon. So we are increasing the fleet in a very high speed, and we aim for 30,000 in the near future. Other people said, no, this is only Chinese. We don't want only Chinese. Turns out that Latin America has now the biggest fleet in the world outside China, and I mean running and coming. And in 2025, their emissions must be procured in cities in C40 cities. That is a commitment that is in place. From any place around the world, those buses are going to come, and it's not happening only in China, as we all know. Of course, they think that China is only the supplier, but investors are beginning to invest in Latin America. For instance, in Brazil, they are setting a factory to produce lithium-based batteries, and they are beginning to build the buses also in Brazil. Now, the issue of guarantees, and everybody was worried, who is going to guarantee these? Well, look at Bogotá, Santiago, Medellin, Cali, São Paulo. They have guaranteed the procurement processes all over these recent years. And the banks, they don't want risk. Yes, they don't. So capital funds took the place of the banks, and the water utilities took the place of the banks, which is very good news. So sorry, we don't need any more to beg for loans from banks. That is the main conclusion of Latin America, and the reason why this region is moving pretty fast, country by country, making an important difference on speeds in how buses are replacing, how electric buses are replacing diesel fuel or CNG fueled buses. If you want more information about how Latin America is moving, you have this e-bus radar that we created with Zebra and our several partners here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Manuel. Thanks for that brilliant presentation. So we are right on time. We have like around 15 minutes to take up questions from the audience. So Alok and Manuel, we take few questions from the audience. So first question that we have for Alok, what difficulties does he foresee with respect to supercapacitor buses flying into major cities of India like Mumbai? Yeah, Alok, if you
What
can take
problems do I foresee?
Yes, for Indian cities, if they have to take up supercapacitors.
So charging infrastructure, as I said, would probably be most challenging. But if you can integrate charging infrastructure within, let's say, public transport interchanges or close by depots, so you cannot. I mean, one problem with the supercapacitors is that you cannot rely on too much of dead run. The whole range per charge is only about 12 to 16 kilometers. So your depot has to be nearby, and then your charging facility has to be en route. So those are key constraints when you design a supercap system. But if you're, let's say, serving a railway station and you are running a feeder loop, circular kind of a feeder loop service, then it's fantastic, because a railway station could be your charging point, and you can just run the loop and then always come there and do your layover and charge your vehicles as you're doing the boarding or lighting, and it's completely safe, and then you do the loop again. So I mean, for those kind of operation is fantastic.
Okay, thanks, Alok. We have one more question for Manuel. In one of your slide, you mentioned that the electricity requirement is 100% renewable. So can you please elaborate more, like what is the model of generation and distribution of that electricity for e-buses charging? And is it supplied by the same electric utility company like Enel itself?
Yes, Enel and Engie are electric utilities producing energy in Chile, and this is Chile actually. So as they are producing clean energy, because they are forced by their headquarters to start, to move fast enough into zero emission electricity generation, clean energy actually, they are able to supply clean energy to the buses. So that was part of the commitment that they acquired with the national government in Chile. That said, means that if they were not involved in the business in Chile, probably the energy supplier wouldn't be able to supply only 100% only clean energy. But the good thing here is that at least I think it's 60% of the energy that is being produced in Chile is clean. And since these two companies are involved in the production, they can guarantee this energy is kind of energy is coming for the charging system for the buses.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
Manuel,
you.
for that. Yeah. Alok, next question is to you. This is a very interesting question. Even I had this in my head. India being a country which is heavily dependent on subsidies, and China gradually has removed subsidies, and they are requesting the transport agencies to procure buses. So, what do you think has stopped India to sort of extensively adopt the buses, considering such good subsidies? What do you think are the constraints for India?
So one of the things, in my opinion, and of course this is a very opinionated answer, is that in my opinion, one of the reasons why electric buses have not taken up very rapidly in India is a policy disconnect. And when I say policy disconnect, so central government is of course is creating this FAME mechanism and everything. But when you come to the state level and you look at the operating models, they are in every state they are different. The specifications are different. The technical standards are not aligned. And there are a lot of challenges, and even if I just say I'm an operator and I want to come in and operate on a gross cost contract, they're not identical around the country. There are different models, there are different type of risk transfers, and there is no very little standardization. So there is no coherent and consistent approach towards the implementation of electric buses. And what happens is that under those circumstances, most of the transport operators, they tend to take the no risk approach, and no risk approach is which we have been doing for last 40 years, and which is just keep doing your diesel buses because you know them very well, you know how to maintain them, you have the depot for them, you have everything. So there is no need to work anything extra, because you need a little bit of a, when we boil water, there is a concept of latent heat. Water doesn't boil at 100°. You need that latent heat to make it jump into the steam from water. And this is exactly what you need for electric buses. If you want to make that jump, you need that extra push of latent heat, and that is needed through a policy framework for people to jump over from diesel to electric. It requires creation of infrastructure. It requires creation of charging facilities. It requires creation of skill set, and then a coherent policy. Then it will work, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. We have a couple of more questions. First to Manuel. Can you please share some of the operational challenges faced in Santiago in this deployments in terms of the actual operating range? Like in India, we are seeing like the operating range which is being received by the transport authorities are in the range of 60 to 70%, and in some cases even less, up to 50%, what has been quoted by the OEM. So how is the experience around some of the operational challenges in Santiago, and how are you overcoming those things?
Right, very good question. Thank you very much. And the thing is, let's take one of the operators, Metbus, that is the one that is more advanced in this process. And turns out that the bus supplier was offering a battery or a bus with around 250 kilometers of autonomy. And it turned out that this wasn't the actual range for the buses. The buses went up to 230 or something like that, but it was good enough for the operator, the bus operator. They were not really complying against that difference, and everything goes in terms of the logistics, becomes logistics. So as you know, there are some time during the day, there is a time where you have the bus completely full, peak hours, and then there is a time where you have less people, valley hours. And and the demand is down, so many buses go back to the depot. So what the operator is doing is that they make a short time charging of the buses during the period they are at the depot, during valley hours, and then during the night. So they have enough energy to run around the city with all the buses without any issue, because they put a little bit of energy during the day in those buses. So it's logistics subject. The other operators that have another brand, in theory, that brand has a better, a longer range batteries, and they haven't got the same issue, because the distances they need to run during the day are quite lower compared to the other operator. But if they have this same issue, they can go back to the depot. Actually, all the buses, many buses go back to the depot during the day, and they can stay there for 20 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, more time, and it's enough the time to have an additional bit of juice for the buses to run more kilometers.
Thanks, Manuel. Alok, we have another interesting question from one of our audience. So he thinks actually a supercapacitor is very futuristic for India. So he wants to know, has China or Hong Kong had any experience with battery swapping technology, and if they had some quick analysis on the capital cost and operating cost, how it affected when compared to a normal inbuilt battery in an electric bus?
You mean supercap?
Comparing battery swapping, because he thinks supercapacitor is too futuristic for battery swapping as an option for e-buses.
Okay, battery swapping in China, the trials have not been very encouraging, and over the years, there were a lot of battery swapping farms. They actually created huge infrastructure. I'll be happy to share some pictures to you. 2 million square foot kind of battery swapping farms, depots they created. Where you could 200, 300 buses could go in one time and swap the batteries, massive ones. And I can tell you that today, as far as I know, that there are only 2 remaining ones in China. All of the others have been closed. There are no new cities which are going for battery swapping because of 2 reasons. One, in a battery swapping system, you need a lot of batteries. You need literally 1.8, 1.9, even double the amount of batteries you need for as compared to a conventional system. So, and the cost of battery is still high. So battery cost becomes one of the issues. Second reason why swapping is difficult is because you need a whole industrial infrastructure to make a swap. I know some experiments are happening in India with Sun Mobility and Ahmedabad, and they're doing battery swapping using robotic arms. I think we have to just see in the long run how sustainable that model turns out to be in the end. So, but the jury is out. It didn't work in China, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work anywhere. So it can work probably. We'll see how that experiment goes. The third problem with the battery swapping was the issue of dead mileage, because you can't put battery swapping everywhere. So when it comes to buses, and they have to always come back to some place to do this swapping, which has to be a standalone facility due to fire loads and all kind of other reasons, because you're storing so much battery there, and then change the battery and then go out again. So the whole advantage of battery swapping was to optimize the range for the buses kind of diminished in that kind of a model. So multiple reasons, and that's why it has not proven to be very popular. As far as I know, in this region, no city is at the moment exploring battery swapping as an option. At least in Asian countries, nobody is. Not even in Europe that I'm aware of who's actually exploring the battery swapping at the moment.
I agree on that. We saw the experiment in Shanghai. We analyzed that. We put some figures there, and we didn't suggest any swapping alternative for any city in Latin America.
Yes, okay, thank you. We have maybe a couple of questions we can take, Amik.
Yes, Kunjan, we can take at least 2 or 3 more questions.
Yeah, so I have one question for each. So I'll first ask to Alok. Alok, like in Shenzhen, how is your experience in terms of training and capacity building of STU personnel for this increased e-bus adoption? How they have sort of prepared with learnings from OEMs? Can you share some insights on that?
That's directed to me.
Yes, yes, in
Yeah,
Shenzhen.
so okay. So I mean, one way they did was, so there were two parts. One is the operations part. One is the bus engineering and maintenance part. So fundamentally, the operation part is not very changed. Not doesn't change very much. If you already have a very data-driven, digitalized bus operating infrastructure, battery fits in quite easily into that infrastructure because what batteries require. I think the key difference between the old style of bus management and new style of bus management is that old style bus management was buses were run with people's heads, inside people's heads. So you had people who had 20, 30 years of experience. They know everything as a back of their hand, and they can just make decisions. They know exactly what to do. So, but in a digitally enabled modern bus infrastructure, you have AVL system, automatic vehicle location system, you have advanced driver assistance systems, you have OCC at the back end, you are doing a proper fleet management, you have electronic scheduling and dispatching system. Once you have all these things, then fitting a battery system, battery bus into that is not a big challenge because it has certain rules and you define those rules and parameters, and it fits exactly into your rest of the fleet. Driving wise, a battery bus driving, and I can tell you, I'm a bus driver myself. I'm a qualified bus driver. So driving wise, there is not much difference in drivability. In fact, I find battery buses to be better. Some drivers don't like it because the battery buses don't have that, that vroom that diesel engine has, where you press the pedal and it makes a sound and a vibration and a noise, and that gives you the kick. You don't get that kick in battery, unfortunately. It's very quiet. You press the pedal and the bus moves. So it's as simple as that. So, but drivability wise, they are very similar to diesel buses. It is the maintenance side which is a challenge, where you have to completely transform your depots so in a normal bus, if you're maintaining 2,000 parts, in a battery bus you are down to 100 parts, to looking at those, and it's clean, there is no oil, it's not dirty, and the maintenance regime is completely different. But in case of Shenzhen, what they did, that at the maintenance end, they actually got BYD to partner with them. So BYD really embedded themselves in Shenzhen bus, because they also realized with these kind of big orders that they were placing, that Shenzhen bus's success was their success. So they embedded themselves, and for them, this was the biggest, best live laboratory. So they went in there, they trained all the staff, they built up the capability and capacity inside the organization. They wrote all the maintenance manuals, they wrote all the, they put all the, the digital infrastructure related to maintenance, automated a lot of processes, and then handed it over to Shenzhen bus personnel. So I think that hand holding was really, really useful as far as the knowledge transfer was concerned on the engineering side. And by the way, the
Okay.
batteries are still managed by them. So the BMS and the battery management system is still day-to-day operations is done by, of course, SOC, and all those things are managed by Shenzhen Bus. But the battery chemistry and the major issues related to the battery maintenance are handled by BYD.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the detailed answer. I have one question from my side. Last question to Manuel, and maybe if Ameg has one or two questions, we can take that. Manuel, in one of your slide, you also mentioned about utilities leasing buses to the operators. So can you please elaborate more on that? Like, is it based on per kilometer basis or per month, or what's the model between them?
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate this invitation, and I need to go after this question. Turn on the car, sorry. The model is as okay. They lease the buses and they receive the payback from the government. So the payback from the government is defined in an equation that has been agreed in the original contract between the operator and the government. So the operator passes the invoice to the government, and the government pays to the operator the operational cost mainly, and then to the energy facility the amount of CapEx that has been agreed for the 10 years time. So the government pays to both parties, to the operator, the operational cost, and to the electric facility, the CapEx. And this is what has been established originally in the contract, but they need to agree on how much money is going to cost within the 10 years time of the contract. Now, if the contract is finished beforehand between the government and the operator, the new operator needs to follow the same rules, and the CapEx is granted to the utility company. Now, how the leasing is there is an agreement between the utility company and the operator in terms of the utility company owns the buses and put the buses for the operator to operate within certain rules. The operator needs to be certain part of the maintenance, comply with certain specifications of maintenance, and part of the maintenance in the electronics is carried out by the bus supplier. So it's a triangle, if I can say so, based on the equation agreed in the contract between the original contract between the operator and the government.
Okay, sure, thank you.
And really, I appreciate really very much this opportunity, but I need to go to another conference, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Thanks,
Webinar. Thank you to both our speakers for joining and sharing their useful insights.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Amit. Thank you,
Thank you to
Kunjan.
all the attendees for joining and their patient hearing. Thank you, Amig and Ayushi from my team for coordinating this webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.